This is Shalom World Podcast.
Have you ever thought about the clash between our digital world and what's right and wrong? That's where The Porn Disaster comes in, a series that dives into one of society's most hush-hush topics. Get ready for some real talk as we dig into the ups and downs of today's tech-driven desires. Kids, relationships, recovery, we're not holding back. From the Catholic Church's take on porn to why our brains get hooked, we cover it all. Join us as we chat about the messy stuff, the good, the bad, and the uncomfortable. Hosted by Patricia Keene, we've got an expert panel here to chat about porn addiction, what it does, how it affects us, and how we can heal.
Welcome to Shalom World. My name is Patricia Keene and I am coming to you from Maynooth, County Kildare, Ireland. I'm here to present a 12-part series on pornography called The Porn Disaster. Do you know that porn is now one of the leading forms of adult entertainment in the world? Today, 2.5 million people will visit a porn website. Over the past 75 years, porn has expanded throughout the world, encompassing every country therein. We're going to be dealing with the issue of porn, an industry that is now accruing 97 billion per annum in income. Part of the story is about the secrecy of pornography, the hidden facts that few people want to address because of many aspects which we will be looking at over the coming 12 series. I want to introduce my 4 guests making up our panel for today's episode.
Father Alan Hoffa, priest from the Diocese of Allentown, USA. He has BA in Philosophy and Masters in Divinity. Father Chris Hayden, priest from the Diocese of Ferns, Ireland, Spiritual Director, St. Patrick's Seminary, Maynooth. Dr. Keelty Oberlin, she's from Ireland, doctorate in psychology and master's in counseling, specializing in eating disorder recovery. Gerard O'Donoghue, he is an engineer from Ireland, counseling parents and creating awareness around pornography.
My first part of the series today is the global issue of pornography. And the question around this is that when we look at the leading adult entertainment format, Pornhub, we see that they have traffic of 47 billion per year to their website. If we break that down into realistic numbers, it would mean that every man, woman and child would visit that website just under 6 times a year. They are phenomenal numbers. So, Father Alan, I'm going to you for the first question about the big issue of pornography globally. How big is it?
It's massive. And one of the biggest issues is when you look back 30 years ago, the issue of pornography was reduced to magazines and maybe some VHS tapes. But because of the internet, now the availability of it is massive. When you consider that there's 4.2 million websites that are available with pornography, when you consider that this industry is now exceeding over $100 billion worldwide, when you consider that on a daily basis, there are 68 million searches on Google alone for pornographic terms, the accessibility is what has made this so wide-reaching and such a problem throughout the entire world, not just in one area of the world, but all over. And we'll get into more later on about all of the reasons why this is, but one of the things is that it is so accessible and it is being backed by so much revenue that comes from this industry.
What feeds the hunger for pornography?
One of the realities is that in the world in which we live, there are so many conflicting messages about human sexuality. Mm-hmm. And this is a sort of unlimited ability for anyone to develop in their own mind whatever they want because of the different forms of pornography and all of the different things that it addresses within the human person in terms of our needs. And you can connect that to pornography in many different ways. And so its ability to connect on all of these levels is what makes it so attractive to every different person. And it is something that does not discriminate based on age or gender or anything like that. And so it is so pervasive, and that's why it's so important that we're here to talk about it.
I want you to explain to the viewer just your background, how you got into helping people with pornography. How did that come about?
One of the big areas was I was working in schools, in a high school, and what happened was one of my students, she took a video of herself performing a sexual act and sent it to a young man. The young man then sent it to others, as she thought he wouldn't, but he did. But then what really put it over the top for me was the fact that he posted it to an anonymous site on the internet. And so instead of it just being passed around on a local level, now it has exceeded to an even greater level where it was part of the worldwide porn market. And as a priest, I see all of the people entrusted to my care as my spiritual children. And the fact that one of my children was now subject to this, it was shortly after that Integrity Restored and the parent company Stewardship and Mission of Faith came to me and said, would you like to be a part of this ministry? And when they explained to me what it was, there wasn't a doubt in my mind. This is so important to be a part of because of the way in which it's ruining lives from the youngest of children, and we're going to talk about those ages at 8 and 9 years old, all the way up through the most senior of persons in our communities and society.
Thank you. Kilty, you are a practitioner. You have a PhD in eating disorders. Okay, and you have been working in this area for many, many years. There's an argument going on about, is pornography an addiction? Okay, or is it a behavior? So can you clarify that? Because World Health Organization says one thing, and then another organization says something else. So we want to clarify this because this impacts on people, their understanding. We need to get understanding for people.
Yeah. And the reason, Patricia, it is asking this question of me is that with eating disorders, we actually have the same issue. Eating disorders are also considered another process addiction. But yet at the same time, there's a debate about what is addiction. Does pornography actually fall into that category of addiction? So, and so it's clinically and diagnostically, we could spend a lot of time, because a lot of very smart people have spent a lot of time debating over whether or not it is. But the fact of the matter is, for those of us, when people engage with pornography, it tends to draw them in more on a neurological level. It stimulates the brain. So people continue using. Sometimes they want to, sometimes they don't want to, and continue using despite the fact that they would prefer to stop. Then we can see that it actually can begin and is chronic, because it can have a continued, it gets worse and worse, where chronically we begin to see their life begin to get their well-being compromised. Their sleep is deprived, their relationships are compromised because isolation sets in. Mood also is featured. So when we go through under the addiction category, what is an addiction? Does it meet criteria? You can check all of these boxes. And neurologically, when neuroscience comes in and you study the brain of somebody who's been using porn and you match it with other people who are known addicts, their brain imagery, we see that actually their brains are similar. The brain has been impacted. So on these levels, yes, we could say that it's an addiction. However, other people can still come in and counter that. But the fact of the matter is it's a problem, and that we see this clinically. So I don't want to get caught in the semantics of it, because we do recognize that it's a severe detrimental issue.
So we want a definition of what the Catholic Church has to say, what the Catechism says about pornography, because there's a bit of confusion around this also for Catholics. So can I ask you to respond to that question?
Okay, there's a very clear line in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is obviously the touchstone for teaching on a broad range of issues. And it states that pornography is the removal of sexual acts from the intimate embrace for the purposes of displaying them to others. And it goes on to say, and it uses the harshest language you'll actually find in the whole catechism. It goes on to say it offends against chastity, It perverts the conjugal act. It does grave harm to all who participate in it, whether as producers, actors, consumers, across the board. And I think it's important to say that you won't find stronger condemnatory language anywhere else in the whole catechism, but it's important to add immediately that the Church's take on this is one of compassion. The Church is saying, yes, pornography, utterly wrong and injurious, harmful, detrimental in and of itself, but our arms are wide open to those who struggle with this. And that's a terribly important pastoral point to make. Yes, this is serious. Yes, it's gravely injurious to you and to everybody else concerned. That the Church would say to anyone struggling with it, but come and let's talk. Let's come and experience God's mercy. Come and let's be mended. Come and let's taste the possibility of freedom, because you don't have to remain stuck here. So again, we stack up those two things together, and mercy always outweighs the issues. But yes, the Church's teaching is very clear. Pope Francis likewise says it's a vice. He says the devil enters from here in his kind of characteristically blunt way. So he doesn't mince his words, but always in the background. No, in the foreground is mercy and the possibility of great freedom.
You are a father of 6 children. So Father Chris is talking about the catechism, right? A devout Catholic, you're constantly teaching. So what happens when you try to teach the catechism to children? Are they responsive? Do they want to hear about what the Catholic Church has to say through its catechism about pornography, sex outside of marriage, about how... Is there a dismissiveness even amongst the Catholic families that you would be around? Because this seems to be an issue when you go to talk to people.
It depends on the age group. I mean, when the children are young, there's no dismissiveness. You know, they're open to it. Maybe when you go into secondary school level and that age group, it's more a sense of maybe they feel awkward about it because they know a lot of their friends aren't from that same background, etc. They don't view it that way. So there's an awkwardness there. But it's children, I think of any age, are always open to the truth. You can see that. They respond to it. They recognise truth. But they mightn't always want to show it among their peers. So it's just a willingness, maybe sometimes to look cool, but they certainly are open to it.
Okay. Father Alan, is the Catholic Church the only church that opposes pornography?
No, there are so many on both a religious angle and also in the secular world that are seeing more and more the effects of pornography and are speaking out about it. The Mormon Church, for instance, was one of the first, at least in the United States, that was bringing to the forefront this issue of pornography. Christian churches all around the world are bringing up this issue. But then beyond that, we see that there are secular entities. One of the most common that I've found in my work is a website called Fight the New Drug. And it's excellent. And again, its title is very telling. This is the new drug. And they have so many things. It's, again, secular in nature. It does not bring in a religious component, but the truth is there. And the scientific world also, for persons who do not subscribe, maybe they call themselves an agnostic or even an atheist, this secular world has science to be able to back this up. At Integrity Restored, we look at both the faith aspects, the moral theology of the church, but then also the psychological, the neurobiological realities. And Keelty brought up a great point of those things like mapping that are being shown through science and all of the characteristics that are being shown about what addiction really is and the processes and things that are leading up to addiction. And that's, I think, also very important, that there are stages to this. And the world is showing us from multiple different aspects, a religious and a secular, that there are multiple ways and that there's a pathway that only leads to deep-seated problems if this issue of pornography is coming into the lives of anyone, but especially when it's started at a young age in a facet where children can't fully process and understand what is going on in these images, in these videos.
Father Chris, the Catholic Church is still seen to be prudish around sexuality matters. Is that true?
No, in a word, it's not. I think really it's a defensive stratagem. We accuse the church of being prudish because we don't want to hear, we don't want to live what she has to say. There's nothing prudish about offering people guidelines that will help them. I don't want even to say guidelines, it's a little more than that. Offering people guidance that will lead them to lead a life that flourishes. I mean, look around, look at the consequences of a sexual free-for-all. They're not encouraging. And that's not being curmudgeonly or looking down on a fallen world. We're all fallen in some measure or other. But no, the church emphatically the church values sex and sexuality more than the secular world. So there's a certain inverse prudishness around today when people don't toe the line. I mean, the gasps of horror if you don't toe the line now exceed in intensity anything that might have been heard when I was a kid for the other reason. So no, emphatically the church is not prudish. The church loves all of God's creation, including the gift of sex and sexuality, wants it to be proclaimed and lived and cherished and taken delight in, but in its proper understanding, its proper meaning. And I know that we'll revisit that whole point in later conversations.
Mm-hmm. There's the constant debate about, listen, it's time for the Catholic Church to move forward in its thinking, that pornography is here to stay, that it is part of the everyday life of people. Is there any merit in that?
As much merit as there would be in saying cocaine is here to stay, car crashes are here to stay, periodic disasters are here to stay, and yet even more demerit because we can actually address this. Pornography is, we don't say that about any other troubling area of behaviour, any other evil. That sort of fatalism, there's an agenda behind that, and one could speculate ad nauseum regarding the nature of the agenda. But no, we have something to offer to children, to young people, rather than, sorry, little people, this is here to stay, we can't help you. That's not what we're about as church.
When this series goes out, we have two priests sitting together on one side of the table. You know, they don't have family life. What do they know about pornography? But I've been working with the two of you over, well, Father Alan since the last few months and you, Father Chris, the last couple of years. And I can say that from working with you, that you know more about pornography than anybody else I've ever spoken to. So for anybody who may have that thought in their heads, I mean, two celibate men devoted to God, giving their lives to God, the work that you have put into it has been absolutely phenomenal. And it's only been through working with you, Father, since 2021 on your book about a vision that it led me into pornography. And then Kilty, you joined us for several of this series. And when we got to the end of it, it was, okay, we need to do more about this because we were only scratching the surface with it. But I would say that for anybody, you know, who is questioning what we're doing here and questioning, you know, our priest that has flown from Pennsylvania, Father Allen, you're probably one of the most experts in the whole workings of pornography because you've been at school level, primary school level, secondary school level, college level in dealing with pornography. And you know the influence that it has on society. So let me ask you to share some of that, please.
I think one of the big things as we're talking about all of this, and you were speaking to Father about the teachings of the church, it is important for us as we go through this, and I think that our presentations are going to be as such, that oftentimes the church gets labeled as a church that just talks about is against the bad. Don't do this. But we also have a message of hope that that is about the good. And we make that differential. We need to speak against the bad, but we also need to speak about the good. And we have both to share. Because as priests, one of the beautiful areas that we're in is we get to be part of not only one family, but so many. Not in connection with just one individual, but with so many. Whether it's in sacramental confession, pastoral counseling, in the ministries that we have. And I can tell you that from my own perspective, and I'm sure Father Chris, along with many other priests would agree with me, is that we are being inundated in so many different ways, whether it is in the confessional as just confessing sin, whether it's in the turn away from church and the practice of the faith because the church of porn is much more attractive to them and that's where they're spending their time. The dissolution of marriages and the harm that it has. children turning inwardly instead of finding healthy relationships with one another because of the trauma caused by pornography. And the list goes on and on. One of the things that we look at Integrity Restored is the amount of money that is lost by businesses because of persons viewing pornography while on the clock in the workplace. So many different aspects.
We are just coming to the end of the first part of our series, and we will be coming back with the second part. And the second part of our series is going to be about addiction. And we're going to explore what addiction is, that route to getting hooked on pornography and not being able to get away with it, and why pornography is so attractive, why it's appealing. And we will be back to discuss that one in our next episode. But Father, before we close this one, I want to go to you for a little prayer, please.
Certainly, given that pornography is such a huge issue and we realise we can feel like David versus Goliath, there's only so much we can do. We'd be wise to reflect, I think, on the serenity prayer and to take it back out and ponder it in its richness. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to you joining us for our next episode around addiction. Thank you.
And that wraps up this episode of The Porn Disaster. Thank you to our incredible panelists for sharing your expertise and insights. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in and being part of this important conversation. If you've been impacted by anything we discussed today, know that help is available. Understanding leads to healing, and by shedding light on these tough topics, we are one step closer to positive change. Join us next time for another enlightening discussion. Until then, take care and stay curious.
Shalom World Podcasts is now available on all online platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others.